Greetings from Cooperstown, New York, in this new year of 2021. And this is our first program, our first virtual program of the new year here from the Baseball Hall of Fame. We're very glad that you could join us today for the virtual author series. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Markison. I work in the education department here at the Hall of Fame. And we're glad to have with us Jay Horwitz, a longtime public relations director for the New York Mets, still works for the team in a little bit of a different area. We'll talk about that. Before we get to Jay, though, we do want to talk about the sad news that came down earlier today. As I'm sure many of you have heard, we lost one of our Hall of Famers last night, Tommy Lasorda, the two-time world championship manager with the Los Angeles Dodgers, passed away last night at the age of 93. I just want to read a brief statement from Jane Forbes Clark, the chairman of the Baseball Hall of Fame. This is what Jane had to say about Tommy Lasorda. Quote, Tommy Lasorda enjoyed a remarkable life in baseball. His legacy will be one of determination, leadership, and perseverance. Those wonderful characteristics that he carried, not only through his career, but throughout his life, and his passion for the game and for the Hall of Fame will be greatly missed in Cooperstown. We extend our deepest sympathies to his dear wife of 70 years, Jo, also the entire Lasorda family and the Dodgers organization. And again, that comment from Jane Forbes Clark, chairman of the Baseball Hall of Fame from earlier today. As we begin our talk with Jay, we do welcome you to the program. We thank you for joining us today. I know that you knew Tommy pretty well from the many encounters between the Mets and the Dodgers. Your thoughts on the late Hall of Famer?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on the program. When I first started the Mets in 1980, Tommy was always very nice to me. Always say hello. A lot to do with Bobby Valentine. Bobby and Tommy were very close, and Bobby introduced me to Tommy. And when Tommy used to come to Shea Stadium to do some promotional work to raise awareness for prostate cancer, used to usher him up to the TV booth, and just a great guy, a great ambassador for the game. And we missed you. What a great life he had, on and off the baseball field.
You're an energetic guy, and he certainly had tremendous energy as well. He was such a great ambassador for the sport of baseball, even until recent years when his health did take a downturn. Just a amazing passion, not only for the Dodgers, but for the game in general.
Yeah, the only thing is, by 1988, they did this a bad thing when they beat us in the playoffs. We beat the Dodgers 10 of 12 games that year, and they snuck up on us, and Kirk Gibson had a big home run, and we lost in 7 games at Dodger Stadium. But I won't hold it against you, Tommy. We still love you.
And Tommy Lasorda passing away last night at the age of 93. As we begin our program with Jay Horwitz, we want to take a moment to acknowledge our new sponsor for the programs in 2021. These virtual programs, like the author series, made possible through the generous support of the Ford Motor Company. The book, again, Mr. Met, How a Sports Mad Kid from New Jersey Became Like Family to Generations of Big Leaguers. Jay, beginning in 1980, starting a long association with the Mets franchise as their public relations director. And then just a couple of years ago, moving into a little bit of a different direction, now the Mets vice president of Alumni Public Relations and also the Mets historian. Jay, I want to begin with that first day when you were hired to work for the Mets, the interview that you had with the general manager, Frank Cashin. It did not exactly go as planned, but ultimately it did work out. Explain exactly what happened.
That was kind of an understatement. This was in the winter of 1980. I had accepted a job to be the stat guy for Tony Kubek and Joe Garagiola on NBC. I was excited about that. Probably about 3 weeks after that, I got a call from somebody. He said, I'm Jim Nagurney from the Mets. We're looking for an offbeat PR guy because we're not a really great team right now. Would you be interested? I thought it was my friend Harold Levine. I hung up on him. The next day, Jim called me back again. I said, well, if this is for real, I'll give it a shot. So I flew down to St. Petersburg, Florida. I went to the wrong hotel. I was supposed to go to a Hyatt hotel by the ballpark. I was supposed to go to the Edgewater Beach Hotel. I went to the wrong hotel. I got the interview late. I walked into the dining room. Frank was sitting there in his little white tennis shorts. I reached over and knocked his huge container of orange juice on his lap. I said, "Oh my God, this is not really going real well." The first question he said to me, "Have you read Brosnan?" I said, "Oh yeah, Shakespeare wrote that, right?" He said, "No, Jade, it was Jim Brosnan, the former White Sox pitcher." He asked me one more question. He said, Frank said, "It's all I need to know." I went back to the airport. I called my mother. I said, "Mom, there's no way I got this job." I don't know how it was. It wasn't my good looks, I can tell you that. But 41 years later, I'm still here.
There must have been something that Cashin saw in you. What, as you look back, what do you think made Cashin say, "All right, Jay Horwitz, the man to do this job in 1980"?
Well, this is what I came from a school in New Jersey, Fairleigh Dickinson University. We didn't have wasn't a large school. We had a lot of different kind of athlete. We had a one-arm fencer, a priest who played hockey, 43-year-old freshman football player, an Arab Israeli goalie on the same soccer team, a baseball player who got hit by a pitch 128 times. And at the time in 1980, the Mets were not great. You were looking for somebody who could air a little humor, promote offbeat stories. Frank made a couple of calls. He was a big, long-time PR guy in New York, Joey Goldstein, one of the pillars of my profession. He gave me a good recommendation, and he asked around, and Frank was willing to take a chance on me, and I'll be forever grateful.
I want to throw some names at you from the 1980 Mets. I'm sure these are going to bring back memories for you as they do me. John Stearns, Lee Mazzilli, Wally Bachmann, Elliot Maddox, Claudel Washington, Ray Burris, Neil Allen.
Yeah.
Anything that jumps to mind when I say those names to you now?
I remember John Stearns. We're in Atlanta one day. He tackled Cheap Oklahoma. He was running out to protect the team. The chief was making some insults against us. I remember Lee Mazzilli was Derek Jeter before Derek Jeter. He was a world championship speed skater. I wrote some stories about that. Ray Burris lived in New Jersey. We used to talk about going over the GW Bridge, how bad the tolls were. Who does the names you mentioned?
Wally Bachmann.
Well, Wally Bachmann was one of the grinders of the team. He wanted to help turn us around. He was a real down-to-earth guy from Oregon, and he was one of the, with him and Mookie, we drafted him in 1980. They were like the fundamental parts of the 86 team, the building blocks 86.
You also had Neil Allen, who was the closer, of course, later traded for Keith Hernandez.
Yeah, and Neil was, we had Jeff Reardon at the time, and Jeff Reardon and Neil Allen were vying for closer responsibilities. And then I remember, I don't want to name the wives. One time, one of the wives came up to me, said I was giving too much attention to the other guy, and there's like battle between the two of them. And Neil's a good friend, lives in Florida now, and we still stay in touch.
He had a great curveball.
Yes, he did.
He was a very talented pitcher. Had some good years back in the 1980s.
Now
we have to mention the manager from that team, and he's a guy that is a member of our Hall of Fame. We've had him on the show a couple of times already. Terrific reputation, great people person. I know that Joe Torre was a very strong influence and very helpful to you that first year on the job.
Yeah, I still have a bone to pick with Joe, though. I got to tell you, he did a Bigelow tea commercial, and in one of his commercials, I walk in the background. I still have yet to get any money from that commercial, so I got to go back to Joe with that. Joe was great. He taught me what a locker room was all about. I was a 34-year-old kid coming from Fairleigh Dickinson. I didn't know anything about anything. On our first road trip to Montreal, he took me to a tie store on St. Catherine Street. He bought me 7 of the ugliest ties imaginable. He said, you have to wear them for 14 straight days. So I alternated the ties. And Joe he took me when we met Pete Rose, we met George Brett, Reggie Jackson. He said, here's our new PR guy, just out of college, Jay Horwitz. Forever grateful to Joe. And anytime I need something charity-wise to make a call, Joe's still always there for me. I can't enough good things to say about my friend Joe Torre.
You know, you think about it, Jay, 1980, there were still a lot of old school managers around, guys that maybe would not have given the public relations director much time or consideration, could have made life difficult for you, could have soured you on the job.
Yeah, he made it so much. I was scared rotten when I took my first day on the job, and I said, what did I get myself into? And we had guys on the team like, Craig Swan and Doug Flynn and Joey Youngblood, Pat Zachary, and Joe made it a point to bring me around to the veteran guys. And it was always like, take care of the kid. He's going to need your help. And, that's really unusual, but he did it. I'm always forever grateful for him for that.
One of the real challenges, one of the many challenges with being a public relations director is having to walk that fine line between helping out the players and also trying to help out the media. You're working in a sense for both factions. Sometimes they are at loggerheads. Sometimes they come into competition with each other. How are you able to establish that balance and keep it for 40 years?
Yeah, it's really a third part of that thing, ownership. The ownership thinks you're partial to the media, and the media thinks you're partial to the players, and vice versa. To me, it's the level of trust that I never wanted to look at myself as a suit. And I think and the players trusted me. I think they knew I had their backs. And, I always try to take care of the 25th guy on the team like the number one guy. And I think they knew I had your backs. I looked out for them. I always tried to make it not to go to the lockers, to ask for something, to be there in case you needed help with schools, plays, dinners, advice from where to move, housing. I just try to make myself available to them. I think I had the level of trust that they knew, they knew I was looking out for them. They knew if I told them something, they would take it. They would, go by it, and they wouldn't think I was trying to go behind the backs or be, partial to one side. It's just having a level of trust is really the main thing.
Still in your early years with the Mets, 1983, this was a huge story. I grew up in the Westchester County area, and I remember when the Mets were able to bring Tom Seaver back in 1983. And I imagine that maybe you had met him earlier, but this was probably the real start of your relationship. You became very close to Tom. Tell us about the first time that you met Tom Seaver.
Yeah, this was in St. Petersburg, Florida, the old Huggins Stengel Field House. I had just bought a new suit, and Tom was taking a whirlpool. And I walked over and said, Mr. Seaver, I'm Jay Horwitz, a PR guy. I look forward to working with you. He said, kid, come close into the whirlpool. I can't hear you. I followed my orders, walked closer, and Tom proceeded to take the hose from the whirlpool and stick it down my pantsuit. And I was having a conversation with the great Tom Seaver, getting soaked to death. I ruined my shoes, ruined his suit, but it was well worthwhile.
Now, that could have been a little off-putting because this is the first time you've met him. Is he kidding around? Is he being malicious? What do you think at the time?
What I've learned through the years, Tom had a great sense of humor. I mean, once you got to be his friend, he took into his confidence. I mean, that year we went to Norfolk for an exhibition game. We left early. Tom and I went to the beach to go swimming a little bit. When he left the player, he became an ambassador and an announcer, and we stayed in contact through the years. Unfortunately, the last couple of years I lost contact, but I learned he's got a great sense of humor. When he was an instructor in Florida, he would ask me, where's my parking spot? I'm a Hall of Famer. I deserve a parking spot. That was Tom. He was just kidding around, and he would sit in front of his locker and do the New York Times sports word puzzle. And if somebody interrupted him, can't you tell him I'm doing a Times crossword puzzle? Leave me alone. Then he would say, "Come on back." I'm just kidding. So he was a great guy, and I miss him dearly.
Jay, I was very lucky in the early 2000s to interview Tom 4 times here at the Hall of Fame in the span of 3 days in our Grandstand Theater, and he was terrific in many ways. One of the first things he said was, even though you're going to be talking to me 4 times in 3 days, you can ask the same questions every time. You can ask different questions every time. Whatever you want to do is fine with me, and nothing is off limits. I remember him talking so fondly about Gil Hodges. I also remember his incredible knowledge of the art and science of pitching. To this day, I don't think I've heard another pitcher, either current day or former, who could articulate what it was to be a successful pitcher the way that Tom Seaver was.
He was a real student of the game. He really analyzed everything. Can I be provincial for 1 second? You brought up Gil Hodges.
Sure.
I pray to everyone. I speak to his widow, Joan Hodges, a couple of times a week. She just turned 93 years old. and for what Gil did for the game. And I spoke to Carl Erskine about 2, 3 weeks ago. He told me a great story. He said, rightly so, everybody gave Pee Wee Reese a lot of credit for helping Jackie Robinson be acclimated. And the other thing he said, people don't understand what Gil did on his side of the infield. It would played at what time in St. Louis. Somebody threw a beer can at Jackie, and Gil stood with him the whole time and still got cleared up. And for what he accomplished as a player, as a manager, I hope when they get around to voting for him, that he gets in, and other people well deserved, and especially for Joan Hodges and Gil's son, Gil Jr. That's what we're all hoping for in Mets land, and we get another Met in the Hall of Fame.
A lot of times when I interview former players, Hall of Famers, I'll ask them, who was their favorite manager? And sometimes they're a little reluctant because they don't want to say one and then maybe alienate the rest. But Tom Seaver, no question, it was Gil Hodges. That was his best manager.
Yeah, I got very close to the 69 guys. And if you take a poll of the living members, they all say the same thing. We never would have won without Gil Hodges. We platooned 4 guys. He was ahead of the game. He made late minute changes. He had a 5-man outfield. And, he just was ahead of the game in his time. And, and I think, no offense to anybody moving on, if he had stayed alive, I think we would have won a couple more championships. That's, he died at 47 years old. And that's, that's maybe one of the problems. But I'm hoping, upset. I don't want to be a politician, but I just had to get in a word for Gil Hodges.
Oh, that's understood, certainly. One final question on Tom Seaver. You mentioned that you weren't able to speak to him the last couple of years. Of course, his health had fallen off quite badly before he did pass away this past summer. Did you ever get a chance to talk to him about his love of wine, his vineyard? That became a real passion for him probably in the last 15 years or so.
I was fortunate enough back maybe 2015, Jeff Wilpon flew myself and Harry Rose out to the vineyards to see Tom in Calistoga. We had lunch with Nancy. He took us through the vineyards. I mean, he was so proud of the wine, and all the same dedication he gave to pitching is what he dedicated to wine. He showed me the covers where, his winery was on the cover of all these magazines, and he put every effort into that. It was a great, that was really the last time that I had a really back and forth with him. And, he was at the 2013 All-Star game at Citi Field when he threw out the first ball to Mike that day. But yeah, I mean, I was fortunate enough to see him in his surroundings there, and it's another memory I'll always cherish.
We talk about Met pitching greats, and here's a mythical one, the Sid Finch Story, which I remember pretty well from 1985, 35 years ago. For some of our younger viewers and listeners who don't know the story, Sports Illustrated ran an article, and it actually came out on the April 1st, April Fool's Day edition of Sports Illustrated, talking about this phenomenal young right-hand pitcher named Sid Finch. Now, this was a time before the internet, and maybe when we were all less sophisticated than we are now. Many people were fooled. They believed that this was a true story for at least a few days before people finally understood that it was a hoax. How did you handle this situation, being the club's PR director at the time?
Well, one history of this, Frank Cashicool, myself, and Gene Cohn, who was Frank's assistant into the office, told us what George Plimpton and Mark Mulvoy, who was the editor of Sports Illustrated, wanted to do at the time. And just, Frank, this is right up my alley. So the day, the opening paragraph of the story said, this is an April Fool's joke, but people didn't pick that up. The day this thing came out, the late Mel Stoudemire, another great friend, we had a batting cage in back of, in Huggett Stango Field. We put a padding around it, and we told the media that Sid was throwing in there. And Sid was a Chicago school teacher, about 6'5". So they came out of the throwing session, and Ron Reynolds was one of our catchers. We burnt a hole in his glove and said this was Sid's 120-mile-an-hour curveball. I got a call from one of the New York papers that day when his stories came out. He said, the guy was yelling at me. He said, we cover the Mets on a daily basis. How could you give this story to Sports Illustrated and not us? He said, listen, how would you like it if you got a big scoop like that and I gave it to another paper? but we kept it going for 2 days. And you can never in a million years do this today with the internet and the TikTok and all the Instagram stuff. But it was great fun. I enjoyed that immensely. And the players were great. Ron Darling, Mookie, George Foster, Lenny Darkson. They all participated in the thing. We kept it going for a good couple of days.
So you knew about this ahead of time. If you
Right.
had
Yeah.
not known about this ahead of time, what
Yeah.
would your thoughts have been?
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. I mean, Frank said, I said, Frank, this is how I existed for 4 years, for 8 years at Fairleigh Dickinson, doing this offbeat stuff. It was right up my alley. And with the cooperation of the players and Davey Johnson, everybody, we played their part. We kept it going, like I say, 3 days. Jim Fry was one of our coaches in '84. Called me the day the story came out. He said, "How come I never heard of this guy?" I said, "Jim, you gotta get better scouting over the Cubs." So it was fun. It was great. I wish you could do it something like this today, but you couldn't.
Yeah. Now here we have, I'm not sure if it's a photograph or an illustration of the supposed Sid Finch. Did you actually dress somebody up?
Yes.
Skinny kid
Yes,
in
it
the
was
uniform?
Sid was a school teacher or a photographer from Chicago. I forget. We put the old Huggett Stengel locker was a very small place, and we put him next to George Foster and one of the other outfielders. And most of the guys knew what was going on. And hey, best of luck, Sid. Hope you throw well today. They would ask Mel Stoudemire, when does Sid get into the rotation? And Mel would say, well, he's got to throw a couple more bullpens. But Mel really played along with great. And Mel was we were a very professional guy, and he did a couple of press conferences telling the virtues of Sid Finch. It was great fun.
Now, was that his real name or was that a pseudonym?
No, it was a pseudonym. It was George Clifton picked that out, but he was he's just a Chicago school teacher or a photographer, but he was a friend of someone from Sports Illustrated.
That's a great name, Sid Finch.
Yeah, with two D's,
terrific.
by the way, 2 D's.
Yeah, that was great. A year later, something even more memorable takes place, the 1986 World Championship season. The Mets were so dominant during the regular season, but then ran into some difficulties in the World Series. I want to talk about where you were. It was game 6, 2 outs, no one on, bottom of the 10th inning. The Mets are down by 2. Tell us the truth. Had you given up at that point? Did you think?
Let's put it this way: I didn't give up, but I was with Davey Johnson's office. I was sitting with Darryl Johnson, who's one of our coaches, and Davey. I'm saying to myself, how am I going to explain to the press how a team that won 114 games was eliminated in Game 6 in Roane Park? And then our dear friend Gary Carter comes up, gets a single. Kevin Mitchell gets a single. Ray Knight gets a single. And then it was during that time, I had got up. I wanted to go to the bathroom. And Keith said, sit your behind down. Don't move. As you know, baseball players are pretty superstitious. Then Mookie comes up and, the pass ball, wild pitch, whatever it was. And then, the ball through Buckner's legs. One thing that Mookie has felt bad about through the years is people, because of what happened, Bill Buckner was almost a Hall of Fame player, over 2,000 hits, and a ball gets through, and Mookie to this day feels he would have beaten it out. And the next day we're down 3-0, and we come back and win. It was a great. The guys were so many different personalities: Darryl, Straw, Ron Darling, Keith, Wally, and Davey was the one who held it all together. When Davey took over in 1983 at the end of the year, at his press conference, he said, I don't know why it took you guys so long to hire me. I'm the guy for the job. And we won 90 games the next year, 98 games in 85, and then 116 games in 86. But it was just the one kind of sad part about this picture is, of course, Buddy Harrelson is sick right now too. He's got dementia, and so looking at the picture brings a lot of good memories, and it was just a lot of good time. He's a different kind of guy. We just blended together. So many different personalities on the team. We were probably the most hated team in all of baseball that year. Remember one fight we had with the Reds in Cincinnati in July? Eric Davis slid into Ray Knight at third base, and Ray gets up and clocks him. That summer, Mike Tyson visited us. He heard about our fighting exploits, so Mike Tyson came to see us there. So I'm sure there were not many people rooting for us in the World Series that year, but we did it.
It's interesting you bring up that incident with Parker, which I remember pretty well. When something like that happens involving some of the players, what do you, as the public relations director, what do you need to do post game to make sure the situation doesn't get completely out of control?
Well, one thing I learned with that team, you couldn't really tell them what to say. We won that game. Howard Johnson hit a 3-run homer, I think, in the 13th inning. But, Davey would tell it like it was. He wasn't going to, that's why the writers love covering our team. I would just be down there when things would happen, but they spoke their mind, and they very really walked. They didn't go crazy, starting to fight with any of the writers. But I had to be the moderator sometimes. But they spoke their mind. The writers love covering the teams, and that game is probably the typical of our team. We were down. That game ended. Gary Carter was at third base. Jesse Orozco and Roger McDowell were in left and right field alternating, and we won the game when Dave Parker dropped the ball in the 9th inning, and Howard comes up with a big home run in the 13th. That one game is really typical of our team that year.
Were you ever forced in your position as PR director to step in between a writer and a player? Did that ever happen?
A couple of times, my younger days.
Yeah.
One time we had to play a Ryan Church, and somebody he had gotten a concussion. Somebody was criticizing the Mets. We flew from east to west coast and got belligerent. I stepped between him and a couple of times, like when Keith had his problems in Pittsburgh in the mid '80s, and he would come to him in the locker room, and we had an agreement. After Keith made a statement in the beginning, listen, I screwed up. I apologize. I'm good with that. They would ask him questions. I had to deal with Keith that going forward, all he had to say was, I went through this once and I'm not going to do it again. If they started to keep going, I would be the one. Guys, end of interview. I think it's just one thing going about to respect, especially with that team with so many different personalities. The players had to know that I had their backs. It couldn't be a one-way street. I had to step in and help them when they needed help.
I want to talk more about Keith Hernandez in a moment, but let's go back to '86 for just a second. You detail what happened. Incredible comeback from 2 runs down. It's one of the most amazing finishes to a game that any of us have ever seen. What was that post-game situation like? You said you were down at dugout level. What was it like right after Ray Knight scores?
Oh, I was in I came back to the locker room as the guys came in, and we let the writers in, 10, 15 minutes, and then we're, yelling and screaming. I remember bringing Davey to the interview room, and, they just, the guys are by the locker. One thing, those guys never hid from anything. We had so many spokesmen, Ray Knight, Keith, Gary, the pitching staff, so they all knew what they had to do. They stood by their lockers, and, we hadn't won anything in game. We still had to go to game 7. So we didn't, it was jubilation and happiness, but, it was still a game to go. And it just, matter of fact, we told what they did, and we still have another game to go. But everybody did their jobs.
Was that the most exhilarating moment of your career? What went on in game 6 and 7?
Well, you know what? Yeah, I go back to game 6 of the playoffs with Houston. We're ahead 3-2, and all of us to a man feel. Don't be offended, Mike, when we say we all felt Mike Scott was scuffing the balls, and Mike had shut us down in 2 previous appearances, so we didn't want to go to a game 7 and face Scott again. So we're losing 3-0 to Bob Nepper, who would shut us down, 1 or 2 base runners. Somehow Mookie and Lenny Dykstra and Keith get big hits. Who goes to the 14th inning. We go ahead. I think then Billy Hatcher. No, not Billy Hatcher. I'm losing it. Hits a home run. Billy Hatcher hits a home run. Yeah, then we go to the 16th. We get 3 runs. Houston fights back, and probably the most famous mound appearance in the history of baseball. I forget who it was. It Billy Hatcher again, or no, it wasn't Billy Hatcher. he comes up with first and second. We're already ahead by 1 run, and Keith and Gary go to the mound and tell Jesse Orosco, if you threw another curveball, I'm going to kill you. And by that time, Jesse had pitched 3 innings. He was tired. He threw his fastball, struck him out. We win. And there's no doubt in my mind that Houston series took something out of us, when we lost the first 2 games at home, because just mentally drained. I remember in game 6, I sat for the same place in the locker room for 8 straight innings, didn't move a bone until we won the game.
One of our fans has chimed in on the chat, said the batter was Kevin Bass.
Kevin Bass. Thank you for remembering. My memory's good. Thank you.
Yeah. Keith Hernandez, Gary Carter. I want to spend some time on both of these great players. This is a quote from Keith a few years back, and this is him talking about you. Hernandez said, Jay was part of the team. He was with us every day. He was always welcome in our circles. There was a separation between the front office and the players. But with Jay, there was no separation. He was one of us. Is that accurate, what he said?
Yeah, I'm going to start crying a little bit now. So, yeah, they made me feel welcome. I mean, I guess going back to what I said in the beginning, they knew, we had a lot of off the field stuff that year, with Darryl and Doc. I must say both guys are doing much, much better. They resurrected their careers. And I was always there for them, and to counsel them and be there. And they knew if there was a problem with the writing, they would go to me. I would help diffuse it. And instead of being there, just asking them to do stuff, I was there for them. And I think they got the sense that I cared. I lived and died with them every week. You're there from, mid-February till October, November. And I think the guys knew that I was there for them. And I lived and died with every loss and every strike and every out. And, they were nice enough to show the reciprocation.
Hernandez, when he joined the Mets, he was coming off a rough time in St. Louis. It had some difficulties with Whitey Herzog there. He comes to a Met team that was not yet a good team, not really yet a contending team. He was one of the building blocks to get there. But it's amazing what happened within about 3 years' time, the transformation of his career and also that Met team.
Yeah, my first meeting with Keith didn't go great. We were in Montreal, and I had read in the newspapers that he didn't really want to come to New York. So I went to Frank. I said, Frank, we got to do something special for this guy. Let me get a gigantic limousine. I would go pick him up at the airport and give him some first-class treatment. So all one good, Frank gives me the blessing. We go to the airport. Unfortunately, I went to the wrong gate. So Keith called me on got a hold of me some way, and he said, where are you? And I said, I'm in a limo. Keith didn't wait. Keith took a cab back to the hotel. I remember going back to the hotel, sheepishly getting out this gigantic, almost street-long limo. And I kind of made amends in the locker room after that, and we've been friends ever since.
I saw you do an interview on the MLB Network, and Hernandez mentioned that the first guy who came up to him was Dave Kingman. He made a rather memorable remark to Hernandez.
What was it? Welcome to the Stems or something like that?
No, I think that was Seaver, but Kingman said something along the lines, hey, I'm really glad you're here because now this is going to enable me to get out of here.
Dave was a different kind of guy. He was a different kind of guy. Yeah, thankfully our relationship with Keith has gotten full bloom through the years.
Well, he was certainly one of the leaders of that club. A leader in a very different way was Gary Carter. I'm just going to tell you a quick story. When Gary Carter was elected to the Hall of Fame, I went down with our multimedia department. We did a long interview with him in the Waldorf Astoria. And the head of our media team, if you will, Bruce Broderson, huge Met fan, he may be watching right now. He looked at Gary Carter's World Series ring and said, boy, that's really nice. So Carter said to him, would you like to try it on? Would you like to wear it? And he lent it to Bruce, and he let Bruce wear it, I think, for the duration of the interview, and then got it back. Now, how many guys would do something like that? I think that says a lot about Gary Carter.
Gary's a special kind of guy. I mean, when he, came over, some people kid in Montreal, they call him Kid Carter or Camera Carter, but Gary knew the responsibilities on and off the field, and he was just a great guy. So much good work in the community with the Leukemia Society. He won the Clementi Award, and two quick Gary Carter stories. The summer of 2011, I had broken my ankle, and I was in the hospital for about a week or two. And Gary would call me religiously. This was at the time he had been diagnosed with cancer. Call me religiously. How you doing? Never wanted to talk about himself. So that the following year, must have been in January. Again, Jeff Wilpon and I, we flew down to Palm Beach Garden to see Gary and Sandy. We walked into his house. He used to call me. He said, "JJ, before you say anything, I'm going to beat this thing." And that was Gary. He was always optimistic, and and I knew there was no way he was going to make the final out in the World Series. He found a way to keep it going, but it's still a shame. Gary died at a young age of 57, and just a good friend, and what he was really uh, uh, scouting before scouting. He kept a book on all the pitchers. Gary would go 0 for 4 as long as we won the game. And, all of our young pitchers, Dwight, Sid Fernandez, Darling, Walt Terrell, Jesse in that time, they all gave so much credit to Gary. He would nurse them through a game. And as long as we won, he didn't care. And when in the playoffs against Houston, Gary was going through an 0 for 20 streak or something like that. And I let him touch my mezuzah. I said, "Gary, this is going to bring you good luck in the game." And sure enough, he got a slow roller up the middle. We won the game in the 11th inning, and just a good guy. I go back to what he said before. 57 is much too young to die, and I miss him dearly. Just a great, great man, and as good a player he was, 100 times better person.
At the time, the Mets had some players who could be confrontational with the media, but Carter was the opposite. He would talk to anybody.
He would talk to anybody, and what a lot of people don't know, after a game, because he never liked to come out of the game, his knees were so bad. He used to have to ice up a couple hours after a game, and his locker was right by the training room. And no matter good, bad, or different, he's always there. On the sixth game in the World Series, or seventh game, he gave about 5 one-on-one interviews to the media. He was always my go-to guy, and I don't think that would happen today, the way the situations are. But he just got what it was to be a leader, and Gary led in a different way than Keith, but they, both were Met captains, both were leaders in their own respect.
Another great personality, later years for the Mets. This is a picture from the book. Here is you having some fun with John Franco.
Yeah.
Tell us about this photograph. What's going on here?
I think this is my 50th birthday party. And a friend of mine, Linda Emmer, and her late husband Mark, had given me a party, and he got this big cake and then put it in the kitchen room, in the dining room table. And Johnny popped out from the cake and scared the living daylights out of me. But I could have written a whole book on the jokes that Johnny played on me. Let me tell you a couple of the cleaner ones. We're in Los Angeles, the old Biltmore Hotel. He gets a horse head, unscrews the horse head, goes up to my room, gets the keys to my room, turns the lights out, puts the horse head on my bed, puts ketchup on my pillows, puts the horse head under the pillows. I thought I had a dead horse in my room. He would put white out on my glasses, rats in my work bag, tie my work bag to a plane, put ice cream sandwiches in my suit. One of my favorite things, I have bad eyesight, so I used to watch the games with binoculars. So Johnny would put blackout on the inner rims of my binoculars. And when I go up to the press box and took the binoculars off, I looked like Petey from the Little Rascals. The dog had like big rings under my eyes. But Johnny told me one thing: if you can't accept, you got to be able to laugh at yourself. And if you take offense to anything in the locker room, you're not going to succeed here. So he taught me. They said to me always, if the guys don't like you, they won't screw around with you. And I guess they must have liked me a little bit because they screw around me a little bit.
Yeah. Now, just to clarify, it was not a real horse's head.
No, it was a metal horse. It was a metal horse. He had screwed from the lobby, carried it up to my room, and got a bottle of ketchup from the kitchen someplace and put it on my pillows. And when I walked into his room, I was going to have a heart attack. There's about 7 or 8 players waiting outside the room, laughing hysterically.
It was good enough to fool you for a couple of seconds.
Yes, it did. It did.
Yeah. I imagine he remains one of your closer friends.
Yeah, Johnny's a good man. He does a lot of good work in the community. He did a lot of great work on 9/11 when we did so much to help the city heal, and he's still doing good work. And he did a lot of good work in the pandemic. He cut some PSAs for the for the MTA for Governor Cuomo, and he did some voiceovers that were they played in the train stations, to wear your mask. He's still giving back. His father was a sanitation worker who taught Johnny what it was to give back to the community.
I want to talk about somebody that you became very close with. We have a picture here of John Franco on the left, but we want to talk about the young lady on the right, Shannon Ford, who was your assistant for many years, and some have described that you were her best friend. You worked together with the Mets for many, many years. She was diagnosed with cancer, I think it was around 2011, 2012, and then passed away a few years later. Tell us about Shannon and what in particular was so special about her.
Well, it should be 5 years. This March 4th, she'll be gone. It seems like sometimes it feels like it's yesterday, and other times it was 100 years ago. Shannon had the unique ability to befriend everybody, the media, the players, the front office. Everyone trusted her. They valued her opinion. There wasn't one person alive who could say a bad word about Shannon Ford. When she got sick, she missed the spring training in 2015, willed herself to get to the World Series. And as cancer was spreading all over her body, and she wanted to get there, and she and David Wright had a special relationship. When David came up, she would be like David's guidance counselor, tell him where to eat, where to live. David was a young kid from Virginia at the time, and she relied on him. But a couple of things wrong about Shannon. When she died, right, my office probably got 500 texts and emails from former players like Mike Piazza, Carlos Beltran, Carlos Delgado. We had a memorial service at City Fields. Over 1,000 people were there. MLB helped build the ballpark in her name in Little Ferry, New Jersey, the Shannon Dorton Ford Field. So now young girls could play on the field. The baseball writers renamed an award after her name. She just made a great impact in everything. That's one of the reasons, to be honest, I wrote this book. And I just found when people died, they died, people forget, and was one of the things I wanted to make sure people never forgot what Shannon Ford was all about. And she's a great model to all young girls who want to get into the business. She was a pioneer in the field, and a great legacy, and I'll never forget it, that's for sure.
You wrote an entire chapter on Shannon in the book. I'm curious, prior to her becoming ill, did she talk to you about maybe wanting to move to another team so that she could become, the head of the public relations department? Was that ever a topic of conversation?
Well, she worked. MLB thought so much of her. She would work the All-Star games and the World Series. She ran our All-Star game in 2013. She ran the Yankees Mets Subway Series. She didn't want to leave her roots. I honestly, we never really talked about it, but she liked it. And she rose up. She was a senior director with the Mets, so she had a lot of responsibility. She did the press guide, and in later years, she had, when she passed away, she had 2 young kids, and maybe if she wasn't ill at the time, she might have considered then, but she, she was very content. She loved the Mets, took care of her family to the end, was a dedicated Met person. And the way at the end, it was just amazing to me how she would balance her illness with a devotion to her family and a devotion to the Mets. And the days she would come into work at the end, she used to shut her door because she didn't want to spend time telling people how she felt. She just wanted to do her work, and she was a real trooper. Again, it's hard for me to believe it's 5 years that she's been gone now.
Yeah. Jay, did she ever talk to you about the difficulties for women breaking into baseball at the time?
Yeah, she did. Yeah, I mean, she came from St. John's, and she took a sports administration course. When I interviewed her, I knew she was a keeper right from the start. She kept score, knew Mets history, knew about the game. She was a true fan, and she just she was very friendly at the time with Robin from the Giants, Melanie Yount from the Cardinals, Debbie Gallus from Oakland.
Yeah.
And yeah, she did, but I tell you what, Jeff Wilpon was so kind to her and good. She recognized Jeff recognized what a talent she was. So I think one of the things that maybe kept her with the Mets so long was with the dignity and grace that Jeff treated her, with everything. And so, yeah, but she was happy to make inroads, going to work at the World Series, going to work at the All-Star games. She ran, the All-Star game, ran the World Series. So people in baseball knew her for a god. When she died, she was just 44 years old.
Yeah.
And if she had stayed alive, there's no doubt in my mind, if she wanted to, she had gotten another position, either in MLB or another team or another sport.
Yeah. Nice recollections of Shannon Ford.
Yes, sir.
Here's another photograph that's actually in the book. You and David Wright having some fun down in Port St. Lucie.
Which one is David Wright?
Hard to tell.
Yeah.
Clarify that for us.
Yes.
Yeah. What motivated you to put the uniform on?
Well, let me go back to Shannon for 1 second.
Sure.
When she got sick, Jeff Wilpon gave me a challenge that if you can get 10,000 Twitter followers, I'm going to make a $10,000 donation to Hackensack Hospital in Shannon's name. This is one of the things we did to try and put stuff on Twitter to get followers. And so this is right before David went to the World Classic in I forget which, 09, whatever the heck it was. And I thought it'd be a great picture for me to dress up at David Wright and go on the field and try and imitate his swing, And I got to say, we did get to 10,000 followers, and Jeff did make good on his promise to write the check in her name.
Yeah, it's an interesting batting stance.
Yes.
I've been to Port St. Lucie several times.
Yes,
I love spring training. To me, it's the best time of year.
Yeah, I don't think I can't hit the outside pitch in that stance. I was good with the curveball inside though.
Yeah. You got to clear those hips out for the inside.
Yes, sir.
We want to take questions from our audience for Jay Horwitz as well. We actually did receive some questions ahead of time by email, and one comes in from somebody that Jay knows. His name, Dave Woolheater. He is the retired sports information director at Ithaca College, Bucknell, and Cornell. And of course, Jay had a long career as an SID back in the 1970s. Dave's question to you, Jay: how did your wonderful career in college sports information prepare you for your dream job with the Mets?
Well, first of all, good hearing from you, Dave. We had a lot of good times, those conventions in Cincinnati and everything. It just taught me to look for the human interest side of the players, that everything wasn't home runs, doubles, triples, homers, to find out what makes the guy tick, what charities it is involved with. In the beginning, we had a second baseman in 1980, Doug Flynn. Doug sang with the Oak Ridge Boys, and he was a country and western singer. Even though you don't have to be a superstar to have good stories written about you, just told me to look inside the person, look inside the personalities. Like I said, at Fairleigh Dickinson, we weren't going to be ranked number one in many sports, but if a guy had a great personality, you can get some good stuff out of it. It just taught me to not look at statistics, look behind the scenes too.
Forced you to become creative.
Yes, it did, no question. Especially when I was at FDU, we were battling the Rutgers and St. John's and all the professional teams in the area. So to get stuff in the papers, it had to be out of the ordinary.
Question from a fan, Ben Fadden. He wants to know, Jay, what advice do you have for high school seniors that might be looking to work for the Mets or a baseball team down the line?
Well, I would advise you to go to college. Go to a college that's got a good sports management program. Get an internship. For me, on-the-job experience is really important. I used to like to hire people from college who worked for an SID and a sports administration program. Or for me, one of the best trainings to hire in my field of PR, you work in the minor leagues. If you work in the minor leagues, you pull the top off, work in the refreshment stands, do one of your visual aids. You work 20 hours a day. So I always found anybody who paid his dues working in the minor leagues is worth hiring. But go to college if you want to go that route, get an internship, and keep getting more stuff on your resume as much as you can.
Another question we had, what was your favorite thing about Shea Stadium? This comes in from Nick Lanza in Houston. Your favorite thing about Shea, Jay Horwitz?
Well, I knew where everything was because I was there for 29 years. I didn't get lost. The offices were close together. You were right next to people, and it was just been here for so long. It's just when we did well when we got in the playoffs, Shea Stadium rocked. I think City's going to do the same thing this year. It's just a great feeling, a great atmosphere with the train in the back and the apple out, in center field. It was just a great place to be. And a lot of people thought it was, not the newest stadium in the world, but I love being there and made a lot of good friends there.
It's interesting. Shea Stadium often was criticized. My father was a Met fan. I mentioned to you this off air, and he often took me there back in the 1970s. And I loved the atmosphere there. I thought it was great. Maybe it wasn't the most elegant ballpark.
Right.
Maybe it didn't have the history of Yankee Stadium. But the crowds were enthusiastic. The planes going overhead didn't bother me. I thought there was an ambiance there.
Right.
I liked it. I thought it was a good place.
Yeah, and we had the old Jets locker room. The Jets used to be there with us the first couple of years. Used to walk by and see Joe Namath or Bill Mathis or Matt Snell walking the hallways. There was a lot of good mix. It was it was a good place to be. I mean, City Field is great, but I still have great memories for Shea Stadium.
We're getting some questions in on the Zoom group chat as well, so let's take some of those. This one comes in from a fan, Paul Kelly. He writes, what memories do you have of Rusty Staub?
The Grand Orange. No doubt in my mind that Rusty would have a plaque in Cooperstown if he stayed with one team. I think got 500 hits with 4 different teams. But just forget about the stats for a second. All the work that Rusty did for the police department and the fire department, raised millions of dollars for their charities, helped fight the hunger in New York. I mean, just a great humanitarian. And Rusty was my jogging partner my first couple of years here. We used to jog to a mountain in Montreal, and Rusty was the executive style of jogging. We got to the top of the mountain, and Rusty had a cab waiting for us to take us back to the hotel. So we would jog one way. We got to the top of the mountain. It was a cab waiting for us to take it back. Rusty is a great man, and he did so many good things off the field, just like Gary and like David Wright did through his career. It was he just, I mean, I don't know what you feel, but if he had stayed with the one team and got the one identity, I think he would have been in the Hall of Fame.
I have to ask you about his great work as a chef. I imagine you went to Rusty's restaurant on a few occasions.
73rd and 3rd, where he was great ribs. We used to have we used to raise money for the police and fire. We used to have Rusty's ribs in the bullpen, and he used to bring us to the ballpark all the time. Great ribs, and I used to go there all the time. He used to look like a mess coming out of it. That was my problem.
Yeah,
Just get the sauce all over my shirt.
Question from David Wallach. I'm sure that Shea Stadium, City Field have to be your favorite stadiums, but does Jay have a favorite city stadium to visit, and why?
I like Dodger Stadium. I mean, it's immaculate there. It was actually I think it was 1962. It was around there. It just looks immaculate, and the setting with the hills in the background, and it's just a great it's a great stadium. I like Wrigley Field and Fenway Park, the older parks too. But I always like going to Dodger Stadium.
Another question from Paul. Any stories of Mr. Met, the mascot? Now, your book is called Mr. Met, but of course, the mascot for years has been known as Mr. Met. Do you have a favorite mascot story?
Just that, how great they are. Most of the Mr. Mets are actors and singers, and I guess the people don't realize, they're talented people. They would go to kids' parties and charity events, and they would not only do what they do at the games, but they would really be talented people. Maybe sometimes they were all Broadway actors and, who would perform. So they were just very, very talented people. And because they always were there with a head on it, people didn't realize how talented they were.
Did you ever try on that uniform?
No, people think that I could be Mr. Met because my head is an 8 1/4 head. And the only person, with all due respect, who's got a bigger head like me, well, 2 people. I cracked Bruce Bochy's helmet one time. He thought he had a bigger head than me, and he gave me his helmet, and I cracked it in the back. And Fay Vincent and I always used to compare heads. Fay had a different kind of head than me. He's kind of this way, mine was up. So we used to talk about our heads every time I used to see him.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that Bochy was with the Mets.
Yeah, for a year, but we could come back and he used to call me Headley.
Very good. Here's an interesting question from Scott Shanes. Now with new ownership in place, is your role with the Mets changing? Also, do you foresee a Mets old-timers game down the line?
Well, I think, I think, well, Jeff Wilpon was the one who put me in this role as the alumni director. And honestly, when I wasn't crazy about it when I first started, I liked the camaraderie, the locker room, the travel. But, after I thought about it for a couple of days, we really haven't built up a lot of connections with the older players. And I think in the last 2 years, we've been able to reestablish a lot of connections. And right now, I think I'm going to have the same role, hopefully. And I think we're going to probably have an old timers game. It might not be this year because of the situation. I mean, until we're sure when the fans can come in and, it's safe for the players to travel by plane. I think, Steve Cohen is committed to do that, to come, Banner Day, the Hall of Fame and other stuff. But a lot of stuff might not happen this year. It's going to be kind of like a wait and see thing to see what happens. But it's definitely on the radar.
Oh, I remember Banner Day so well. It was usually a Sunday in between games of a doubleheader.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It was a great promotion. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure that'll be back.
Let's see. Other questions that we have. Tom Van Wee has an interesting question. What has been your biggest challenge as a PR director over the years? Maybe one particular moment or one aspect of the job that's especially difficult.
Well, I mean, we talked about a little bit before is, striking the balance between being credible with the media and keeping the players' trust. One time we were in St. Louis and, Jeff Kent, who is an avid hunter, had carried a pistol with him. He used to go to a gun range to shoot. And instead of, hiding, we told the media what was there, why he had the gun. And it was a one sentence thing. Just keeping your credibility up with the three facets of always, not losing the trust of the media and the players. Once you lose any of those facets or ownership to players or the media, a PR person can't exist. So it's really just, never lying. Not lying, just trying to tell the truth, and maybe not all the truth, but don't fudge, especially in my market. We would travel 10, 12, 14 papers. In the playoffs, there's maybe hundreds of people. Once somebody finds out you're lying, you're a dead person.
Yeah. We're going to take one more question from the audience. It's from Megan Roche, or Roche. I'm not sure how to pronounce. But Megan wants to know, Jay, do you remember the feelings you had during the first game after the 9/11 tragedy? What was that?
It was one of the things I'm proudest of. Everybody says, 86 was great, but if you had to ask me what's my most vivid memory of my time with the Mets was what the team accomplished that year. We really helped the city heal. Numerous visits down to the ground zero, no media there. The contributions we made to the police and the fire department. Our guys donated a day's salary to the police and widows of police and firemen. We came and connected with Tuesday's Children, who took care of the 3,000 kids who lost a parent on 9/11. And just the things we did. I mean, the home run that Mike hit was great. It was tremendous. But after the game to me, it was even more tremendous. All of our players came out in the locker room and signed autographs in the dugout for the kids, from the firemen, the policemen. And, for the first time in 10 days or so, people were able to smile a little bit. We brought some joy back to the city. And that's probably, I got to give credit to Bobby Valentine. He really one of the organizers of that. And Todd Zeal and Robin Ventura and all the guys, Outlighter, Johnny Franco. Just to be a part of that team was something I'll treasure and always remember.
Our guest has been Jay Horwitz, longtime employee for the Mets, first as PR director, now working as the director of alumni and also as the team's official historian. The book is Mr. Mets, How a Sports Mad Kid from Jersey Became Like Family to Generations of Big Leaguers. You can purchase the book at the Hall of Fame website. just go to shop.baseballhall.org. Again, shop.baseballhall.org. It's right on your screen. And then do a search either for Mr. Met or for Jay Horwitz, Horwitz. And you can purchase the book. Part of the proceeds will benefit Jay. Some of the proceeds will benefit us here at the Hall of Fame. So everybody comes out on top. We do want to thank you, Jay, for being with us. It's been a lot of fun, great memories. We could do this for 8 or 9 hours and still not cover all of your Mets history, but we do.
I appreciate, thank you, Jaime. I want to thank Tim and John for helping make it possible, and you're good friends.
Tim Mead is the president of the Hall of Fame, and John Shestakofsky, our head of media relations here. In addition to thanking Jay Horwitz, we also do want to thank the Ford Motor Company. They're our new sponsor for all of our virtual programs. We appreciate the generous support of the Ford Motor Company. Thanks again to Jay Horwitz. Thank you to all of you who have joined us for our first program of the new year. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.